Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news this week, Damascus airport in Syria is bombed. We'll have the details there. Also, North Korea and the latest moves from the international community. But first, a meeting of the two popes. Well, there was an embrace between St. Mark and St. Peter as the Pope of the Orthodox Coptic Church received the Pope from the Catholic Church in Cairo, Egypt on April the 28th. The two popes first met privately and then delivered speeches together. Coptic Pope Tewardos II stressed the importance of Pope Francis's trip to Egypt as moving in the direction to open up friendship between two groups of people and their religions.
Pope Francis referred to Tewardos II as a brother, focusing his speech on unity between the Catholic faiths. Francis said, as Coptic Orthodox and Catholics, we can always join in speaking this common language of charity. Before undertaking a charitable work, we would do well to ask if we can do it together with our brothers and sisters who share our faith in Jesus.
After their speeches, the two popes signed an agreement in which they pledged to advance both religions in full partnership. To make an outward show of this pledge, they declared that any person wanting to convert from one church to the other will not need to be re-baptized.
Interesting. The two popes then exchanged gifts, as is their tradition, and made a procession to the St. Peter and St. Paul Church to pray. The church was bombed by ISIS terrorists back on December 11th, 2016. 29 people were killed and 30 more were injured during prayer time. Pope Francis paid tribute to the dead victims, placing white and yellow flowers at the spot, lighting a candle, and praying before their photographs. He also touched a clear panel covering a blood-stained wall, a vivid reminder of the attack. So they didn't, cleaning that up. That was still there where those people were actually killed.
That's right. Well, while the two popes were meeting in Egypt, the Syrian capital, Damascus, was being bombarded by airstrikes. According to the Syrian state news agency, Israel is believed to be behind the attack. The area rocked by early morning explosions was near the city's airport, assumed to be a target of the air raid. The Damascus International Airport is used by both civilian and military purposes. At this time, it's too early to know the extent of the damage or if there have been any casualties in the attack.
Yeah, what we do know is that in 2015, there were similar attacks on the Syrian airport, which Israel was accused of as well. Israeli attacks on air bases in Syria have been ongoing, including the Mazeh military air base there in Damascus, and another attack on an air base in Homs just last month.
Well, Reuters cited a regional intelligence source saying that the Israelis were hitting an Iranian ammunition depot used to supply Israel's #1 enemy in the region, Hezbollah. The armed Lebanese group has been one of the Syrian government's most effective allies. Hezbollah now fights on several fronts in Syria against ISIL and other extremist anti-government groups.
But as to the question of who is to blame for the attack, it's unlikely to be rebel fighting groups. There haven't been near enough to reach Damascus since 2013. However, the Israeli government's reaction to this latest incident is not clear. The country's intelligence minister did not deny nor confirm whether the Israeli Defense Force was behind the bombing. He only stated that the move corresponds with the Israeli policy in the region.
And what is this policy? Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told reporters back in March of this year, our policy is consistent. When we identify attempts to transfer advanced weapons to Hezbollah and we have the intelligence and the means, we act to prevent it. This is what we have done before, and this is what we will continue to do. We are firmly determined, he said, to do so, and everyone should take this into consideration.
Concerning an agreement with Syria to end the war, Netanyahu has said Israel has no objections. But, he told RT News, we strongly oppose the possibility that in such an agreement, Iran and its proxies will remain a military presence in Syria. I think these things were made as clear as possible.
At the time of those comments by the Prime Minister, the most serious airstrikes from Israel on Syria had just taken place near the ancient city of Palmyra. Now, Syria responded by deploying its air defense systems and also fired a number of missiles towards the country of Israel. In a tit-for-tat response, the Israeli defense minister increased the rhetoric, saying, if they, referring to the Syrian government, do that again, Israel will basically destroy Syria.
Very strong words. Well, we have learned about a problem of another kind in Syria. Weapons from a NATO member state have ended up in the hands of ISIS terrorists in Syria. Back in December of 2016, the Bulgarian investigative journalist made the discovery. A commander from the Western-backed Free Syrian Army claims the U.S.-led coalition knows about the situation, but is choosing to ignore it.
Now, when the eastern part of Aleppo was liberated from the jihadists in December, this same journalist explored the ammunition warehouses that belonged to the terrorists. But what she found was unexpected. Literally tons of weapons, all marked as being manufactured in Bulgaria.
Interesting. Now, there were 9 warehouses full of heavy weapons with the country of origin, Bulgaria. There were 2 million shells and 4,000 rockets, which somehow ended up in the hands of the jihadists. The journalist told RT News, and she said when it became her mission to find out how weapons from her own country ended up in Syria, when she, actually found out that they were that Bulgaria was the country of origin. Well, not only did she trace them back to the manufacturer, which is VMC, she also figured out where the weapons were being shipped to before they reached Syria.
Sources told her regular supplies of weapons were being moved through the Black Sea to Saudi Arabia. Now, this led her to the exact ship. According to marinetraffic.com, a nautical trafficking website, the Marina Donicia is classified as a Hazard A ship. And what that means is its cargo contained weapons and explosives. Now, after looking at satellite information, the vessel was found to be traveling between Bulgaria and Saudi Arabia on a regular basis. So these weapons were being transferred back and forth there.
Interesting. While Saudi Arabia has denied providing al-Nusra with any kind of direct help for a long time, it does admit to supporting the Free Syrian Army, as does the U.S. and other allies.
Well, North Korea has released a propaganda video in which Kim Jong-un can be seen watching military maneuvers. President Donald Trump told Reuters News that this week a major conflict with North Korea is possible, but he would prefer a diplomatic outcome to the dispute. Now, Trump told Reuters there is a chance that we could end up having a major conflict with North Korea. Absolutely.
Well, North Korean's UN mission says its government would react with an all-out war with the United States by turning it into a nuclear war. So not any more conventional, nuclear war. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson tells the press they have a plan in place to handle the situation, he says. We put in place a very deliberate strategy, which we are just in the early stages of executing, and it's one that does involve bringing stiff pressure to bear on the regime in Pyong Yang. It also involves calling on China to play a role with how we deal with this threat.
Well, Tillerson has made the claim that Beijing is threatening to impose more sanctions on North Korea if it conducts further nuclear tests. However, China's foreign ministry has neither confirmed nor denied that claim. And as we've said before, Katan, China is North Korea's largest trading partner, not to mention its main source of both food and fuel. So, there's a big connection there. And as we've mentioned in the past, that's where Donald Trump President Donald Trump went in there and said, basically made China a better offer, saying it'd be better to deal with us and just let North Korea go.
Yeah, so trying to use that leverage of China in what it provides North Korea economically to the U.S.'s advantage. Well, now the ball is kind of in China's court, so we'll see which direction they go. Tillerson is chairing a special meeting of the United Nations Security Council and plans to speak on the showdown between the U.S. and North Korea. The situation is pretty bleak when the senior U.S. naval officer, Admiral Harris, commander of U.S. Pacific, testifies to the Senate Armed Forces Committee that the crisis with North Korea's Kim Jong-un is the worst point he's ever seen. It's at that worst point.
Well, chairman of the committee hearing, Senator John McCain, asked Admiral Harris this question. And it's clear, he said, that his goal is a nuclear weapon and the means to deliver it to the United States of America. Is there any doubt in your mind? Well, Admiral Harris's response was, there is no doubt in my mind, Chairman.
Well, we know that other members of the Security Council are not in total agreement with the United States intentions or moves are concerning North Korea and some of the other conflicts that are taking place in Syria as well, but particularly North Korea. Larry, what do you have in regards to the latest developments in regards to Russia and Japan's response to the United States in dealing with North Korea?
In a meet this week between the heads of Russia and Japan, the hot-button topic was the issue of North Korea. President Putin called for all parties involved in the conflict to refrain from military rhetoric and strive for common constructive dialogue. The leader also expressed the belief of a common task among the two nations, that of the early resumption of six-party talks. Prime Minister Abe followed by saying that he and President Putin agree that both Russia and Japan will continue to closely cooperate and appeal to North Korea to fully comply with the UN Security Council resolutions and avoid further provocative actions. Analysts report, however, that while there is a veneer of unification being projected by both nations publicly, privately, there are disagreements. Japan reportedly believes that Moscow should work more closely with Washington and that Russia should be more open to the idea of implementing sanctions. Meanwhile, the Russian media is proclaiming that the world is closer now to nuclear war than at any other time outside of the Cold War period of 1958. The Kremlin asserts that the conflict with Pyong Yang should be remedied through dialogue and by employing diplomacy as opposed to military strength. Their critics say, however, that Russia is not doing enough, and certain elements are pushing for Moscow to apply more pressure. For its part, Russia has dispatched military reinforcements to the North Korean border, but with everyone watching, there seems to be a consensus on at least one thing. No one allegedly wants to see the situation escalate. With that in mind, President Trump is shifting diplomacy into high gear, recently inviting ambassadors from the United Nations Security Council to the White House to discuss the issue of North Korea. The president stated that the Pacific nation is a real threat to the world, whether everyone wants to discuss it or not. North Korea is a big problem that they have to finally solve, he said. And he went on to say that people have put blindfolds on for decades, and now it's time to solve the problem. At this point, Washington is threatening to impose more sanctions, but has also left the military option on the table. In fact, the U.S. just recently dispatched a nuclear-powered submarine and an aircraft carrier group towards the Korean peninsula. In response, North Korean news published a comment stating that the United States should not run amok and should consider carefully any catastrophic consequences from its foolish military provocative act. Striving to mediate, China has called for a calm, measured approach, stating that the situation on the peninsula is complex, sensitive, and highly tense. That was reportedly a message delivered directly to President Trump by the Chinese head Xi Jinping via phone, where he also urged the president to be mindful of the fact that both parties must be willing to compromise. Determined to fight back, however, a large-scale artillery drill by the DPRK is being called an act of further provocation. Analysts believe the action was intended to send a message to South Korea, who was reportedly involved in joint naval drills with the U.S. and Japan. A reporter who was able to gain access to the north delivered coverage just as the nation's national 5 o'clock morning alarm sounded, a call which the Republic's citizens reportedly answered eagerly, each one ready to fight the United States if need be. In hyping themselves up for the potential confrontation, North Korean soldiers allegedly recount the days of the capture of the USS Pueblo, the U.S. Navy spy ship that was captured by the North in 1968. They say now they have a weapon that could sink the USS Vincent, and they are not at all frightened by the three-way joint exercises involving the South. Ultimately, the soldiers say that they have faith in their leader, Kim Jong-un, that he has the weapons and the manpower to fight back against the U.S. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, as we can see with Larry's reporting, all countries' minds are on North Korea and the situation there. And as you can see, nobody wants this to go nuclear. They realize what a great threat that would be to the entire region if that takes place. Well, with that pending threat, Japanese officials have warned its citizens that a North Korean missile strike will only take 10 minutes to hit Tokyo. Now, according to a New York Times report, North Korea may have missile capabilities exceeding the knowledge of the United States. Former U.S. diplomat Jim Jantris said that a lot of what we're seeing and hearing is based on fluff, and we don't know what we need to know. He mentioned the meeting between President Trump and the U.S. Senate at the White House instead of the Senate, stating the real question isn't where they are meeting, but what's being said.
Well, continuing, he said, is there anything being done to de-escalate the situation with North Korea instead of what we're currently seeing? That is, threats and intimidation. Jantris said that North Korea is a real player in this, and he thinks they would definitely use nuclear weapons, considering that the U.S. is, of course, making statements like, if China doesn't do anything, then we're going to handle this ourselves. And like we just reported, North Korea did say that they are willing to go to war, but they're willing to turn it into nuclear war. So that's definitely a possibility.
Well, those statements send a message that the U.S. is willing to take very serious actions against North Korea, which is what it'll take to get through their hardened facilities. Now, if North Korea's back is to the wall, Jantris said that he has no doubt that they would devastate Seoul and maybe do something to Japan as well. As far as the U.S. president inviting the Senate to the White House, he says that it's a grand gesture, kind of like dropping Moab in Afghanistan and the strike on the air base in Syria, saying it was a kind of showmanship, but what is really behind these actions, that's what we don't know yet.
Well, in regards to what the international community thinks of all this, he continued by saying, when you think of the Security Council, you're really saying the Chinese and Russians, because French and British are just satellites and don't really have an independent voice in the matter. The Chinese and Russians have made it very clear that they want to see a de-escalation, but if it turns into a contest of threats from both sides, well, there's nothing that they can do about that.
In the Pacific, U.S. forces may be ready to strike North Korea, but may not be ready for an all-out conflict, according to the Pentagon's head of the Pacific Command, Admiral Harris. Now, Harris told senators that his forces don't have enough torpedoes, bombs, and submarines for a long-term combat. He also shocked senators when he revealed that the newly delivered THAAD missile system would not be able to fully protect South Korea from a direct attack from the north. Now take a look at this video of that hearing, the video, of course, courtesy of C-SPAN.
incredibly difficult to counter the 4,000 artillery pieces that the North Koreans have on the DMZ, which could attack a city of 26 million people?
It is, sir, and THAAD is not designed to counter those kinds of basic weapons.
And what is designed to do that? Anything?
We do not have those kinds of weapons that can counter those rockets once they're launched. We do not have those kinds of weapons that can counter those rockets once they're launched.
That's interesting. With all that they've, the military power that they put there, the admiral is saying, hey, we don't have what we need to, defend ourselves if the North does decide to attack. So I'm sure that's got a few people on the edge of their seats. Well, during that hearing with the senators questioning Admiral Harris, Senator Lindsey Graham asked if it was fair to say that we do not have any intentions of invading North Korea at all. Harris responded with, that is not fair to say. The president has said that all options are on the table. Well, as Senator Graham continued to push for answers, Admiral Harris stood his ground even when asked by the senator if we'd attack North Korea without provocation. Admiral Harris said, they have already provoked us.
In an interview with CBS Morning News, Senator John McCain was asked what the North Koreans should assume America will do. Well, Senator McCain said that they should assume that the U.S. will react forcefully. But one problem is that along the DMZ, which is the demilitarization zone, they have artillery and capabilities that would range Seoul, in other words, that they would reach Seoul, a city of 26 million people, which complicates things dramatically. Now, that's why the emphasis is on a country that can restrain them, and that's China.
Senator McCain continued, China has cut back on coal deliveries, but I was not encouraged when China came against our air defense system being in place in South Korea. He said if this exchange begins, the North Koreans could reach Seoul with their artillery, and that could be catastrophic. And North Korea has the capability to strike the west coast of the United States with a nuclear weapon. Now, this leader is not rational, and it is not a person who can be depended on to act rational, Senator John McCain said.
So what is the red line for North Korea? Well, the senator said if it were up to me, a missile on the launch pad that we know had a nuclear weapon on it. I don't think we could wait until launch. Interestingly, the senator said that we do have capabilities that can intercept those missiles once they are launched. But keep in mind what we just reported on when Admiral Harry Harris, said before a Senate hearing that the U.S. doesn't have those kinds of weapons that can counter those kind of rockets once they are launched. So, Katan, it seems like there's quite a bit of confusion there within the U.S. government as to what our defenses can and cannot do.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the international community is seeing this as well as North Korea, can these guys defend themselves from our bombs or not? So I'm sure North Korea is willing to test the waters in that area. If you remember, in March, North Korea launched a successful missile test that confused U.S. satellites. Recently, another test failed just a few minutes after flight or after launch. But this sends a clear indication that the North doesn't plan on stopping its missile program. South Korea and Japan sternly lashed out after this latest test. The South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Jun-hyuk said, the government sternly warns North Korea. If it continues playing with fire like this, it will face strong punitive measures on various levels, including the UN Security Council.
Well, Japan's chief cabinet secretary said, suppose it was a ballistic missile firing, it was a clear violation of the UN Security Council resolution, and we cannot accept the repeated provocation by North Korea. We launch a strong protest against North Korea. And of course, that coming from one of the Japan's cabinet members.
Right. Well, this latest launch came just hours after a meeting of the UN Security Council where U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said to the Council, this is where you make your voice heard through actions. Any failure to take action diminishes your vote for these resolutions of the past and for future resolutions, and it devalues your seat at this council. Well, the U.S. wants China to use its economic influence and its seat on the council to bring Pyong Yang into line.
China wants the U.S. to halt its military buildup and cancel the THAAD anti-missile system that it's installing in South Korea, which they view as a threat. Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, said it is detrimental, he said, to achieving denuclearization and achieving long-term stability on the peninsula. China once again urges relevant parties to immediately stop the deployment process. But there's no indication that will occur as the U.S. continues to increase its military hardware. So despite China's objection to that, the U.S. is still going to build their forces in that area.
Right. In fact, the USS Vincent is off the coast of Japan heading to the Korean peninsula to take part in joint military exercises with South Korea. Even though North Korea's latest missile test was a failure, it shows to some that North Korea is defiant in spite of the political pressure that's being put on them. The question on many minds are, what will happen next? Well, the love of mankind has really grown cold, and it's driving them towards the heat of a 1-hour burning that will soon take place as all nations agree that the next war will be nuclear. Now is your time to come out of this world before it's too late. Learn what you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones, as well as where to go when the time comes. Yeshua Hawkins is the only scripturally authorized spokesperson in the last days, and the house of Yahweh is the only place one can find true salvation and safety. Contact the house of Yahweh to find out more, and when you do, don't forget to request your free copies of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yeshuahawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also go to our website at www.ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do that by emailing them at info@yahweh.com. Any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen. And once again, we'd like to remind you of the 2 free Bible study tools on the market today, the Yisrael Says program and the Ask Yisrael program. By going to www.yisraelsays.com and www.askyisrael.com, you can check out both of these great Bible study tools on the market. They're absolutely free, and they're guaranteed to give you hours of scriptural learning.
Well, get your pencils, your paper, and your Holy Scriptures ready. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.